the Ten Commandments. Do you want them in our public schools? Of course not. Republicans in Texas do. However, a federal judge issued a temporary injunction Wednesday blocking enforcement of new Texas law demanding that all public classrooms in Texas prominently display the Ten Commandments. The judge said the law forcing each classroom to display the Ten Commandments was not intended for the purpose of teaching. Instead, this law was passed to impose Judeo-Christian values, and thereby this law violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which forbids the government from privileging one religion over another. Identical laws in Louisiana and Arkansas have also been passed and then blocked by federal courts. Ken Paxton, the state attorney general for Texas, said he plans to appeal the ruling. Hey, Ken, the seventh commandment is thou shalt not commit adultery. You might want to take a look at the Ten Commandments before you start posting it in all your public classrooms. Paxton's wife last month announced she's divorcing Ken on what she called biblical grounds, which means he's been carrying on an affair so torrid that Ken Paxton was impeached last year after it was learned he talked a wealthy real estate investor and donor into giving Paxton's mistress a job in Austin so Ken Paxton could get closer to her while he was violating the Ten Commandments. Hillary Clinton said on Wednesday she believes the Supreme Court will eventually overturn the landmark Obergefell decision, which legalized same-sex marriage back in 2015. She says they're going to overturn that the same way they overturned Roe. Well, you might remember back in 2022, after the Supreme Court reversed Roe, the democratically controlled House, Senate, and Joe Biden realized too late they should have codified into law a woman's right to an abortion by passing pro-choice legislation, thereby making it impossible or next to impossible for the court to take away a woman's right to have an abortion. So fully aware same-sex marriage was next on the chopping block, Joe Biden signed the 2022 Respect for Marriage Act. This was passed by a democratically controlled Senate and House in 2022 in response to the Supreme Court overturning Roe. The Respect for Marriage Act mandates that every state must honor and perform same-sex as well as interracial marriages. That's how terrifying these Republicans are. They're not only coming for same-sex marriage, they're coming for interracial marriage. So the constitutionality of this bill, the Respect for Marriage Act of 2022, is now winding its way through the courts. And Hillary made her comments saying that same-sex marriage is going to be under threat with this Supreme Court. She said this during an interview on a podcast entitled Raging Moderates. That's the name of the podcast, Raging Moderates. They think they're funny. I'm a raging moderate. Get it? I'm a raging moderate because it's a contradiction in terms. Well, it's your contradiction in terms, a-holes, that's going to keep Republicans in power. I'm a raging moderate. I want equality, but not too much equality. I want to put an end to income inequality, but not too much income inequality. These are the D-bags who preach affordability and an opportunity economy because they don't want to pay more taxes or see their real estate values dip because the government's building low-income housing. We don't need raging moderates. There's no such thing as a raging moderate. They're called cowards. They're called people who have more money and don't want to admit to being Republicans. So had Hillary won in 2016, right now we'd be looking at a 6-3 liberal majority on the courts. You don't win elections by being a raging moderate. Here is Tim Pool, who was recently issued a press pass so he could ask questions during the daily White House press briefings. Now, Pool has a huge following because He poses as a former liberal turned rabid MAGA supporter. Sam Cedar does a great job eviscerating this guy. He is one of the biggest podcasters, and he gets a larger and larger following every week. He's bigger than most leading journalists. Here is Poole talking about the Supreme Court revisiting the Obergefell ruling. This is him speaking right after he admits to not knowing what stare decisis means.
I gotta be honest, Obergefell is one of the most retarded opinions in the history of the Supreme Court. It
legally, right?
Yeah, legally, just it's a garbled nonsense. It makes no sense.
Wow. Maybe you don't understand it because you're retarded. When did it become okay to call somebody retarded? Calling someone retarded is so gay. Anyway, he says it's one of the worst Supreme Court decisions. Worse than Dred Scott or the Karamazov decision? I'd like to say Tim forgot about the Dred Scott or the Karamazov decisions, but you would have to know about something before you can forget it. Here's what passes for discourse. Here is why Tim Poole opposes the Obergefell ruling.
Because gay marriage, but I'm like, fine, I don't care. Like, I have gay married friends, and I'm fine with them being gay married, but this is not law. This is fascistic legislation from the bench without any cultural precedent. This is not democracy. This is not a republic.
It's that Bill O'Reilly crap. You know, some of my best friends are gay. No, they're not. Your best friends aren't gay. How is it fascistic? The Supreme Court issued a ruling that you disagree with, so that automatically makes it fascism. You don't know the meaning of stare decisis. You don't know the meaning of fascism or the meaning of the word republic. I played this because guys like Tim Poole are in the White House press room right now asking questions. This isn't the democratization of journalism. It's the coarsening of democracy. Yeah, let's only get our news from people we can relate to. Yeah, I like Tim Poole. I trust Tim Poole because he's just as stupid as I am. James Dobson, the founder of Focus on Family, is dead at the age of 89. Dobson, a child psychologist, was one of the leading forces demonizing the LGBTQ plus community by painting bigotry and intolerance with the patina of phony Christianity. The Southern Poverty Law Center in 2010 labeled Dobson's Family Research Council a hate group due to its support for gay conversion therapy. The Southern Poverty Law Center also labeled Focus on Family an extremist organization due to its reliance on pseudoscience while it trampled the rights of members of our transgender community. You might have heard James Dobson on CBS Radio for years. He sounded so sweet. He sounded sweet. The music was gentle. The lyrics were hateful. Defying the wishes of Orlando's mayor, the state of Florida painted over a rainbow crosswalk this week. It honored that rainbow crosswalk, honored the victims of 2016's Pulse nightclub shooting, where 49 members of the LGBTQ plus community were shot dead, 53 injured, mostly Hispanic, after a gunman pledging allegiance to ISIS opened fire. The Rainbow Crosswalk was outside the site where the Pulse nightclub stood until June of this year, when it was demolished by the city of Orlando, which plans to build a memorial for the victims of the Pulse shooting on that site. Orlando's mayor, Buddy Dyer, responded to news of the state of Florida painting over the crosswalk, saying, quote, "This callous action of hastily removing part of a memorial to what was at the time our nation's largest mass shooting without any supporting safety or discussion is a cruel political act." That's all it is. It's cruel and political. 2 years ago, Equality Florida and the LGBTQ plus rights organization, the largest LGBTQ plus rights organization in America, Human Rights Campaign, both issued a travel advisory for their community, warning visitors to Florida that that state is not safe for members of the LGBTQ plus community. They were joined by the NAACP, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and the Florida Immigration Coalition, which issued a travel advisory for people of color, warning them that the state of Florida is no longer safe for their communities as well, which begs the question, why are we not boycotting Florida? Now, that sounds kind of incendiary these days to call for a boycott of Florida. If you're thinking of visiting Florida, don't, especially if you're Black, Hispanic, or a member of the LGBTQ community. Or if you're not a citizen, don't come here. You'll end up, if you're not a citizen, you'll end up in Alligator Alcatraz. Why would you visit Florida? Why would you give the state of Florida an opportunity to arrest you, abuse you, or why would you give them your money? There was a time when a statement like that, what I just said, was considered perfectly okay. In fact, as recently as 2016, there was a national boycott against the state of North Carolina after then Republican Governor Pat McCrory signed HB 2, a law requiring men and women to use bathrooms according to their gender assigned at birth, 2016. So the NBA responded by canceling plans for Charlotte, North Carolina to host that year's NBA All-Star game. PayPal pulled out of an agreement to bring 400 new jobs to that state. Entertainers canceled their concerts there because of the bathroom law. Within 4 years, North Carolina lost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, all thanks to this boycott, which is why the bathroom bill was repealed in 2020 and North Carolina began electing Democratic governors. So why aren't we calling for a boycott of Florida? It's run by racist, homophobic fascists. Why are we not hearing people in Hollywood calling for the boycott of Florida, an economic boycott of Florida, telling people not to visit Florida? Why don't you hear that? Because NBC Universal and Disney own theme parks in Florida. That's why. Performers, people in show business know they will never get work again from NBC or NBC Universal or Disney or ABC if they call for a boycott of Florida. And if you did call for a boycott of Florida, it would receive little to no coverage in the press because NBC Universal and Disney own so many radio and television stations. They would say, it's not worthy, it's not a news story. It's not a news story, under the guise of why punish the people of Florida for the actions of their racist, homophobic, fascistic Republican government that forbids women from getting abortions after conception? So Ron DeSantis, fascist, racist, was reelected governor by a 20-point margin in 2022. He won by 20 points. That's why you blame the people of Florida. Ron DeSantis was reelected by a landslide. I know it's impossible for Black people to vote in Florida. They're not responsible for Ron DeSantis, but the rest of that state is. So I'm calling for a boycott of Florida. If you want to bring your kids to a theme park, take them to Disneyland or Universal in California, where the weather's much better and the people are friendlier and better. People are better in California than the people of Florida. Boycott Florida. Don't go there. Don't go to Florida. Don't give them your money. As Republicans rig the midterms as they gerrymander and try to gain disproportionate power in Congress, never forget, you also vote with your wallet. Georgia's Election Integrity Act of 2021, this was barely 4 years ago. It was signed into law 4 years ago. A shameless attempt to suppress the vote for people of color in Georgia. 4 years ago, right after it passed, boycotts began. There were calls to boycott any business headquartered in Georgia. So the CEOs of Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola got scared and they spoke out against Georgia's new voting law. Major League Baseball canceled its plans to hold their All-Star game in Atlanta back in 2021. They moved it because of this voter suppression law. The president of Microsoft spoke out against this new law. That law is still in effect. Why? Partly because Major League Baseball changed its mind this year and staged its All-Star game in July at Truist Park, home to the Atlanta Braves. In just 4 years, our side caved. What happened? The Georgia Election Integrity Act is still on the books. What happened to the boycott of Georgia? There are still long lines to cast ballots in Georgia. You get fined or arrested for handing someone a bottle of water if they're waiting in line to vote. Stringent voter IDs are still necessary to cast even an absentee ballot in Florida, in Georgia. The list goes on and on. Boycotts only work when we want it more than the other side does. Why did we stop boycotting Georgia? Right now, that's one of the few powers we have, the power to decide where and how we spend our money. The Texas State House on Wednesday finally approved a new congressional map, the same one passed in the Texas State Senate, which Governor Greg Abbott promises to sign. Texas Democrats in the State House attempted to block passage for nearly 2 weeks by leaving Texas. That prevented the quorum necessary to vote. They came back. It passed. These new maps are expected to create as many as 5 new reliably red Republican congressional seats for next year's midterms, where Republicans are desperately attempting to keep control of our United States House of Representatives. Right now, they only hold a 3-seat majority. I say this for my foreign listeners. When we talk about redrawing maps, this is about the House of Representatives, not the Senate. There are, I believe, 435 congressional seats that are spread out across 50 states based on population, and then each state divides the number of members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives. They get to draw the maps, and Texas is drawing gerrymandering to create fewer blue districts and more red congressional districts. It's all about the House of Representatives. Former President Barack Obama, along with his former Attorney General Eric Holder, have fought against partisan gerrymandering, but now both men are speaking out against Texas's new bill, with President Obama saying he's in favor of California Governor Gavin Newsom's promise to rewrite his state's congressional maps in favor of Democrats to balance Texas's gerrymandering. On Thursday, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed 2 new bills passed by California's democratically controlled State House. These 2 bills redraw California's congressional maps in order to create 5 new reliably blue districts. It will require voter approval in November via a referendum, but early polling shows California voters are likely to approve. Here is Texas Governor Greg Abbott explaining why his state's gerrymandering is legal, but Gavin Newsom's isn't.
And so what the Democrats have done is disgraceful and potentially illegal. I'll tell you this much. If California dares to try to squeeze out more Republicans, there are going to be lawsuits that will overturn that. What I can tell you in the state of Texas, the 5 Republican seats that we are adding, they are going to withstand legal challenges, and those will be Republican members added to the United States Congress.
The reason your map is going to hold up in the courts is because your state's Supreme Court is filled with Republicans, and it stops with state Supreme Courts, thanks to a 2019 Roberts Court ruling saying that issues of gerrymandering are now left to be decided by individual state Supreme Courts, and the United States Supreme Court will no longer hear appeals on the redistricting of congressional maps. So yeah, your power grab will hold up in the courts because your courts in Texas are controlled by people who benefit from this power grab, but don't pretend it's legal. Don't pretend you're not violating the spirit of Article 1 of our Constitution by denying millions of Democrats in Texas representation in the House of Representatives. That being said, I was reading in the New York Times today that Republicans in Massachusetts have 0 representation in Congress. They have 9 members. Massachusetts sends 9 members to the House of Representatives, 2 senators to the Senate, not a single Republican. Why? Gerrymandering. This is James Otis, who was one of the leading revolutionary figures during the War for Independence. He was from Massachusetts, and he came up with the phrase, this is a Massachusetts attorney, big in 1776, he coined the phrase, no taxation without representation. That's what they were screaming, throwing tea into Boston Harbor. No taxation without representation. Of course, they were dressed like indigenous people. That's how brave our founding fathers were. They staged the Boston Tea Party dressed like indigenous people, so the indigenous people would be blamed for tossing tea into the harbor. But tell me how brave our founding fathers were. And by the way, the Texas Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party was about raising taxes on British tea, not lowering taxes, raising taxes on British tea. So the Dutch East India Corporation could compete with British tea. So the Boston Tea Party was all about raising taxes. Anyway, they were screaming, no taxation without representation, while throwing the tea into Boston Harbor. No taxation without representation. And yet, 36% of the people living in Massachusetts were the phrase, no taxation without representation. 36% of the people of Massachusetts are Republicans, which means they pay taxes and have 0 representation. So is that fair? What's the difference between Massachusetts doing this and Texas? Yes, it's fair because Republicans are worthless douchebags. Speaking of one, Jeff Van Drew is a dentist, and that's the only nice thing I can say about this guy. He used to be a Democratic congressman from New Jersey, but then in 2019, Donald Trump talked Jeff Van Drew into becoming a Republican. So Jeff Van Drew is very concerned about mail-in ballots. He wants to get rid of them because Jeff Van Drew, DDS, is all about voter integrity. Voter integrity. You mean like getting elected as a Democrat and then telling voters, hey, guess what? You just elected a Republican. Here is Congressman Jeff Van Drew, DDS, dentist, telling us how he talks to dead people. Seriously. Listen to Republican Congressman Jeff Van Drew. He's, I think it's Fox News. He's telling people that he talks to dead people, and these dead people tell him that they're filling out absentee ballots. He's defending Donald Trump's promise this week to sign an executive order banning mail-in ballots from being used in next year's midterms because Trump and Republicans falsely claim Democrats use mail-in ballots to commit voter fraud. So this executive order, if Trump signs it, probably won't hold up in court. But then again, who knows? Here's Congressman Jeff Van Drew, DDS, telling us why mail-in ballots are just as bad as not flossing. Look at Jeff Van Drew. Doesn't he look? He looks like he flosses in between bites and not in front of a mirror. He doesn't have the common decency to floss in a mirror to catch the shrapnel. He doesn't care who gets hit by his flying saliva and steak cluster projectiles. You know, those people, Jeff Van Drew, I have a feeling you go out to dinner with me, he just starts flossing in your face. Anyway, I don't know what I was talking about there. Here he is bragging about talking to the dead.
There were multiple mail-in ballots sent to the same person. Sometimes people would have multiple ballots sent to different addresses. Other times, people who were passed away. These are real people I spoke to, large numbers of them, and it's indicative of what happened around the country.
That is Dr. Jeff Van Drew, DDS. Vote for me. I see dead people. He sees a lot of dead people. He talks to dead people. This guy used to be a dentist, and I think I know why. He just, after he ever was around anybody, they wanted to spit. So he figured, I might as well become a dentist. Jeff, you're not talking to dead people. Those are just all the women in your life playing dead, so you won't try to beg them for sex. Although looking at this guy, not so sure being dead would be a deal breaker for this guy. Listen to him.
Different addresses. Other times, people who were passed away. These are real people I spoke to, large numbers of them, and it's indicative of what happened around the country.
I want to spit. Where can I spit? Charlie Kirk runs the right-wing group Turning Points USA, and he's a huge defender of Donald Trump. Now he's all excited because Bill Barr, who served as the Attorney General during the, that's not right, sorry about that. Bill Barr served as Attorney General during Trump's first term. Bill Barr testified Monday before the House Oversight Committee in a closed-door hearing on the Epstein files. According to Republican lapdog James Comer, he's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Bill Barr testified that he saw nothing in the Epstein files implicating Donald Trump. And Charlie Kirk went online and he posted this on Twitter. Former Attorney General Bill Barr told House investigators that he never saw anything that could tie President Trump to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Well, yeah, he didn't see anything. Because as Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. attorney who brought charges against Epstein, is now saying, it would be impossible for Bill Barr to have ever reviewed the Epstein files because they were so voluminous. So maybe Bill Barr says there's nothing in those files to incriminate Donald Trump, but he didn't see the Epstein files. Then again, Bill Barr doesn't need to see the Epstein files to know Trump is innocent. You know, the same way Bill Barr had already rewritten the Mueller report to say Trump was innocent before the Mueller report was even finished. You're looking at Dan Bongino. Sorry that you have to look at him. He's the Secret Service agent turned Fox News host turned podcaster and conspiracy theorist who, before Trump appointed him deputy FBI director, claimed Jeffrey Epstein didn't commit suicide And the government is terrified of releasing the Epstein files because, according to Dan Bongino, all the powerful people would be taken down. That's what Dan Bongino said before becoming deputy FBI director. But then after he became deputy FBI director, Dan Bongino said Epstein committed suicide, even though 3 minutes are missing from the surveillance videos. Then last month, Pam Bondi announced the Epstein files would remain sealed and the investigation was closed. So at first, Bongino tried to go along with this decision, but quickly realized his QAnon fan base was turning on him. Bongino realized, I'll have no audience to come back to once my work at the FBI is finished. So the next day, he refused to come to work at the FBI. He told everyone he was quitting in protest. There are reports he called Donald Trump and told Donald Trump, give him an ultimatum. You have to decide between me and Pam Bondi. And Trump said, okay, I'm going with Pam Bondi. About 2 days later, Trump was asked if Bongino was still working over at the FBI, and Trump told reporters, I don't know, you'll have to ask Dan. Well, Dan Bongino is still there, in name only. He wanted to quit, but then I suspect things were explained to him. You're not going anywhere, Dan, until we tell you. So he's still there, but he's been demoted. The FBI now has co-deputy directors. This is the first time ever. Bongino is not a lawyer, and he has to now share the title of deputy director of the FBI with Dan Bailey, who was Missouri's attorney general. Again, this is the first time the FBI has ever had 2 deputy directors, which means they only have one, and it's not Dan Bongino. He's out, but he's going to have to stay in that position, humiliated every day until Donald Trump decides to free him. Meanwhile, Dan Bailey, as a Missouri attorney general, has been an outspoken critic of rights for the transgender community, and he's tried to block the use of DNA to clear prisoners on death row, to clear innocent prisoners. Last year, for example, Missouri prosecutors filed a motion to block the execution of a man sitting on death row after the prosecutor said DNA evidence proved his innocence, but Dan Bailey, the new deputy director of the FBI, then Attorney General Missouri, tried to stop the hearings to prove the man's innocence. Another man, black, Marcellus Williams, was executed last year by lethal injection, even though he had evidence of his innocence. This guy, our new deputy director of the FBI, didn't care. Execute the man, because it's all about keeping us safe from innocent, nonviolent people of color. The question is, who's going to keep us safe from the police? Wired magazine reporting that there's been a 17% jump in the number of cell phones grabbed by ICE agents for inspections. According to the most recent Supreme Court rulings, ICE agents, as well as customs officials, possess the right to search your phone. They can search the phone of anyone entering or leaving the United States, regardless of citizenship. They don't need a warrant. They don't even need probable cause. It's up to the individual border agents. The border agent, if the ICE agent is in a good mood, he won't go through your phone. If you're an attractive woman, he's going to go through your phone. If he's, so it's up to the individual ICE agent or border agent. I ask a simple question. Why are border agents, why are ICE agents searching the phones of anyone, let alone U.S. citizens who are leaving the country? Why do they have to see your phone if you're leaving the country? How does that make anybody safer? Well, this isn't about security. This is about monitoring all of us and stripping Americans of their rights. Pew Research out with new numbers showing that foreign-born people, citizen and non-citizen, living in this country, that number has dropped by 1.5 million so far this year. It is the first time in decades we've seen a decline in our foreign-born population. And the acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, now promising to flood Boston with ICE agents. This after the mayor of Boston promised her city would remain a sanctuary for migrants. So the Supreme Court ruled that local governments cannot be commandeered by federal law enforcement agencies to enforce federal law. This was a Supreme Court ruling. Congress passed a gun control law mandating that local police assist in performing background checks on gun buyers, but the Supreme Court ruled that background checks for gun purchases, well, that's a federal law. Therefore, the federal government must perform background checks, and they cannot commandeer local police to do those background checks. And the same applies to immigration law. Cities cannot be commandeered by the federal government to enforce so-called border security laws. If a city has become a sanctuary for migrants, like Los Angeles or New York City or Boston, that city can instruct police, teachers, all government employees that you are forbidden from cooperating with ICE. This is why Trump's Department of Justice dropped charges against New York's Mayor Adams, Eric Adams, in exchange for his promise to cooperate with ICE. Remember this? Adams was indicted last year around this time. He was indicted for taking bribes from Turkey and violating campaign finance law. Trump's Justice Department met with him to determine if Mayor Adams would cooperate in rounding up migrants, even though New York City is a sanctuary. Eric Adams said yes, so the DOJ dropped the case. Karen Bass, on the other hand, the mayor of Los Angeles, will not cooperate with ICE. That's why Trump sent in the National Guard and the Marines. It's why acting ICE Director Todd Lyons is now promising to flood Boston with ICE agents. Never trust anybody who has power over your person. That's the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is all about distrusting anybody who has power over your person. I'm going to show you the video of a kid. He's about 13 or 14, and this is why you don't trust anyone in a position of authority. When I was growing up, my dad would take us to Yankees games, and somebody would eventually get drunk, run on the field. Okay, it was my father, and the crowd would go nuts. They would cheer my father. He would take his shirt off, sodomize home plate. No, but this is a tradition. You go to a baseball game, somebody has too much to drink, and they go crazy, and they run out on the field. Remember the kissing bandit? It's part of the experience. So, should someone run onto a baseball field? No. But, any Mets fan could tell you there are plenty of people who don't belong on that field, not just the fans. Earlier this week, a kid ran onto the field at a San Diego Padres game. Watch what happens after he was caught by security guards. This is why you never trust anybody who has power over your person. Watch this tackle. If this were football, it would be a 15-yard penalty. It's clipping. It's a late hit. It's unnecessary roughness. Watch what happens when you give people power. So when I was a kid, I never saw security guards treat a fan that way. I used to watch a lot of sports, and then I discovered I discovered something else. I learned to play with myself instead of sports. But this is that one security guard exerting power over an individual with abandon, a kid, hurting nobody, providing more entertainment. But this is America. Anyone who thinks they're in a position of authority, a mall cop, a security guard, they feel free now to take it out on the rest of us. Donald Trump sent in 2,000 National Guard troops to patrol the streets of Washington, D.C., but a new poll, according to CNN, showing a vast majority of residents of D.C. feel they're less safe with the National Guard in Washington, D.C. But it doesn't matter. They're not trying to make the residents of Washington, D.C. feel safe. This isn't about fighting crime. It's performative fascism. It's making idiots, racist idiots in this country, believe Trump is keeping them safe, even though Washington, D.C. is just as safe as any other city in America. We don't need Trump keeping us safe. We need someone keeping us safe from Donald Trump. The New Republic out with a new story that both Melania's and Donald's cryptocurrencies that each began selling right when Donald was inaugurated in January, those cryptocurrencies are now either worthless or close to worthless. So Melania's meme coin, this is cryptocurrency, it was launched in late January on Inauguration Day this year. Each Melania token traded at $13.73. Today, Melania's meme coin is worth 21 cents. That's a 98% loss on your investment had you bought when it first came out. Donald's meme coin was launched right around his inauguration. It sold for $75 per coin. Today, it sells for $8. Early investors took a bath, but they were treated to a meet and greet at the White House. If you bought Melania's meme coin or Donald's meme coin, you got to meet him. What's going on here? I'm having technical problems. You got to meet Donald at the White House. Your tax dollars paid for that. And then everybody who bought the meme coins, belly up. Donald Trump is like the anti-Hyman Roth from Godfather 2. I can hear Johnny Ola saying, only Donald Trump is left because he never made money for his partners. Donald Trump stopped by the U.S. Park Police Building 3 miles from the White House to thank all the soldiers and police officers for pretending to act like Donald Trump was doing something about crime. And then Donald Trump went on patrol Thursday night. He accompanied Washington, D.C. police on patrol. The only ride-along Trump should be doing is in the backseat of a cop car on his way to jail. Later that night, Trump checked to see how much cash he had in his pocket after once again spotting that transvestite hooker dressed exactly like his daughter, Ivanka. That is the expression on Trump's face. He's looking out the window. He sees that transvestite hooker who dresses exactly like Ivanka Trump. And he's thinking, how much money do I have? Maybe I can treat myself. The New Republic reporting that 1,200 National Guard soldiers have been sent into D.C. by the governors from red states. So you got red state governors cracking down on crime in Washington, D.C. because it's black. Meanwhile, according to the New Republic, 6 Republican-led states are sending a collective 1,200 National Guard troops to assist Donald Trump's crackdown on crime in Washington, D.C., but the states those troops came from have higher crime rates than the nation's capital. Yeah, but not as many black people. This isn't about crime. 3 of my favorite people, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and Stephen Miller, paid a visit to our soldiers in Union Station to deliver them food and to thank them for pretending to keep the city safe. Here is how our racist Vice President J.D. Vance was greeted by a thankful nation, a grateful nation. Apparently, he plucks couches. This is they were calling him a couch plucker. I guess when the feathers inside the pillows get a little dirty, and he plucks. He's a couch plucker, according. I don't know what couch. Well, listen.
Oh look, it's couch fucker. You gonna fuck a couch, buddy?
Right here. Do not go past this.
Mr. Vice President, David Go fuck a couch. Go fuck a couch, J.D. Vance. Go fuck a couch.
People ask me, do you love America? And I do. I do love America. And I love most Americans. This is why I love, I don't know who was calling our vice president a couch plucker. I don't know what a couch plucker means, but this is why I love my country. Here's some more of Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, and the alcoholic Pete Hegseth, our defense secretary, walking to see our soldiers. Some more.
We hear these people outside screaming, "Free DC." Let's free DC from lawlessness. Let's free Washington, D.C. from one of the highest murder rates in the entire world. Let's free Washington, D.C. so that young families can walk around and feel safe and secure. That's what we're trying to free D.C. from. And as Stephen said, it's kind of bizarre that we have a bunch of old, primarily white people who are out there protesting the policies that keep people safe when they've never felt danger in their entire lives.
You hateful, racist bigot. Look at that tableau. Stephen Miller, Nazi. Pete Hegseth literally has neo-Nazi tattoos on his body. And J.D. Vance is an inveterate racist. And he's talking about how it's only old white people protesting the National Guard and ICE. You know why it's old white people? Because if it were black people, you'd shoot them with impunity. That's why, okay? You don't care about crime in Washington, D.C., and it's only white people patronizing black people. How dare you talk that way? You three are some of the most racist politicians and government officials in the past 30 years. waging war on DEI. There's Pete Hegseth renaming all those battle army bases after Confederate soldiers, restoring statues that honor Confederate soldiers. But you're blaming white people for overreacting to a police state. Go F yourself. That's the message from the White House. It's that we love black people. In fact, Trump has naming rights for a lot of institutions in Washington, D.C. That's why the Smithsonian is now calling it the Trump Loves the Blacks Museum of African American History. That's an actual photograph of the new Trump Loves the Blacks Museum of African American History. That's a new Smithsonian museum that you can go to. Here's the Smithsonian Museum of Joe Biden's stutter. It's a museum. Thanks to Donald Trump, we now have an entire museum dedicated to Joe Biden's stutter. Here's the Dr. Jill Biden is not a medical doctor Center for the Performing Arts. It's a new center for it's the Dr. Jill Biden is not a medical doctor Center for the Performing Arts. Here's the Nobody Reads the Failing New York Times Library of Congress. They renamed it from the Library of Congress to the Nobody Reads the Failing New York Times Library of Commerce. The Reagan Airport is now called the What Did Pelosi Do to Her Face International Airport. Seems like an odd name. I liked Reagan International Airport. Here is the Hang Mike Pence Portrait Gallery and the Lindsey Graham Dewdrop-In Rest Stop. I don't know what that's about. Why would he name a rest stop the Lindsey Graham Dewdrop-In Rest Stop? That makes no sense to me. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you to Bob and Mila for keeping the conversation civil in the chat room. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Of course, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to my newsletter. Do me a favor and share it with your friends and hit the notifications bell so you'll always know when I have a new episode. Thank you so much for listening to me.